We're privileged today to have as our next speaker someone whose reputation is rather extraordinary. John King is currently Senior Advisor to Secretary Arne Duncan, where he carries the portfolio previously held by Deputy Secretary Jim Shelton. He is the second in command of the DOE. He was formerly the New York State Commissioner of Education, which is where I came to see him. And he was also the founder of the Roxbury Preparatory Charter School and was director of Uncommon Schools, a nonprofit charter public school that manages 38 high-performing urban charter public schools before being appointed Senior Deputy Commissioner in New York State for pre-K through 12. He holds degrees from Harvard, Yale, and Columbia, not a bad streak, and is a product of the New York City school system. And I can't resist saying that in this audience, where his father was a principal and his mother a guidance counselor. John was part of a program for the gifted. He would have been a great Cook Scholar, and he would have been a student in any one of the high schools that are represented here today. Please join me in welcoming John King. Your timing is brilliant.
Good afternoon. It is good to be with all of you. I have been a long-time fan and supporter of the work of the foundation, and certainly have long admired Harold, so it's a pleasure to be here. What I thought I would do is talk a little bit about how I hope the work that we're doing in the Capitol connects with the work that you're doing in schools and classrooms every day, and talk about some opportunities I think we have to advance the agenda of ensuring equity of educational opportunity for our highest needs students. Certainly, I saw firsthand as a principal the difference that the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation could make in students' lives. We had many students who benefited from being Jack Kent Cooke Scholars, and for whom it transformed their lives. It gave them a chance to do things they never otherwise would have been able to do. And that's what we're all here to do, to create that. And I imagine that many of us are in this room because someone did that for us. Certainly that was the case for me. Harold mentioned that I went to New York City public schools. I was in 4th grade at PS 276 in Canarsie, Brooklyn, when my mom passed away in October of my 4th grade year. And my father was very sick, and he then passed away when I was 12. And during that period of my life, like many of the kids we worry most about, my life could have gone in very different directions. My teachers could have looked at me and said, here's an African-American Latino male student growing up in New York City with a difficult home situation. What chance does he have? But they didn't. Instead, they looked at me and saw opportunity and chose to invest in me and to create the kinds of academic experiences that all of you strive to create for students. Shakespeare in elementary school is why I'm standing here today. Reading the New York Times every day in 4th, 5th, 6th grade is the reason I'm standing here today. The kind of teacher who, when you finish a book, is there with the next. When you finish a math problem, has just one more for you to do that's a little bit more challenging than the last, is the reason I'm standing here today. And the question for all of us, and that I'm thrilled that you are in this room focused on, is how do we do that for more kids? How do we make those opportunities possible for more kids? That's what drove me to become a teacher and a principal and to do the work that I do. And we know we have a long distance to travel. I'm sure many of you read with great concern the recent study from the Pell Institute, which laid out the tragedy of the opportunity gap in America, the fact that in the top quartile of families in terms of income, 77% of young people graduate college by 24, and in the bottom quartile, it's 9%. 77 versus 9. Actually, more disturbing even than that in that study was that of those who start, in the bottom quartile, 20%, students who enroll in college, 20% graduate by 24. In the top quartile of income, 99% finish. So we have a getting to college problem, but we also have a very stark getting through college problem. So what do we do together about this? Well, one is, how do we help the students that you have every day? How do we ensure that the students that you are working with every day have access to maximum opportunity? Some things I worry about, and I know that Harold worries about, the problem of undermatching. Will the low-income students in your high schools, will they end up at colleges that will provide them maximum opportunity? Will they end up at colleges that will provide them with maximum support? And have we put in place in every school the kind of college counseling experiences that will ensure that our lowest income students, particularly those who are first generation, get to the best college for them? And too often, we are satisfied just with the indicator, did students go on to a college, missing the important fact of whether they went to a college that will ensure that they get the right supports and guidance to get through to graduation and on to success after they graduate. Are we doing everything possible in our schools, in your schools, to ensure that students are as ready when they get to college as possible? We've documented in our Office of Civil Rights a tremendous opportunity gap in course taking. High schools in this country that don't offer calculus or physics. High schools where students just simply aren't going to get the kinds of opportunities that would lead them to STEM careers, for example. Your schools don't have that problem, but one question to ask is, who's in the courses and how are they doing in those courses? Are students from low-income families, are students of color, are students who would be first-generation college goers, are they enrolled in those advanced courses at the same level? And when they're enrolled in them, are they succeeding in those courses? And are they doing it not just in the humanities, but in the STEM fields? Right, across those opportunities, are we ensuring equity of opportunity for our highest needs students? What about extracurriculars? I was talking to somebody yesterday who works at the department, and she studied, she studied something very unlike what I studied, nuclear science or something like that. And I said, well, how'd you get to the department? And she said, well, I was a high school debater, and I loved debating. And then I was a college debater, and that led me to get an opportunity to work for Gene Sperling, who worked for the president. And she described this winding path that led her to a leadership role at the department. And I thought to myself, that debate team mattered a lot in her life. And I wonder, in the schools represented in this room, when we look at extracurricular opportunities, again, our highest need students are the students most likely to be first generation, are the students with the most significant economic challenges. Are they participating in the extracurricular activities of the school at the same level as their peers? And if not, what can we do about that? So it is advanced coursework that we've got to watch, but we've also got to watch those extracurricular opportunities. And related, what happens in the summer? After my parents passed away and I bounced around with different family members, I had the opportunity to go to boarding school. And one of the things that was very odd about the boarding school experience was some people went to very different places in the summer than I would, places I'd never heard of, and maybe one day, if I hit the lottery, I'll get to see. But those summer experiences can be very different for our affluent students and our highest need students. And so one of the questions to ask, in addition to advanced coursework and extracurriculars, are the summer opportunities that students experience who are most at risk or who are first generation. How do those experiences compare? Now, many students who are from families that are struggling economically will have to work in the summer, but there's a difference between working in the summer at McDonald's and working in the summer at Hale & Dorr, some other law firm, right? So figuring out how we support students and getting access to the best summer opportunities is also part of a readiness agenda. But what about the students who don't make it to your schools? What about the students who should be there but aren't? And one of the questions we have to ask is about admissions policies for the most competitive opportunities in districts. But what about just the access policies, separate from the admissions policies. We could probably have a good debate about what kinds of criteria should be used to get into selective high schools across the United States. But what about just straightforward access issues, like what portion of the middle school students who are going on to competitive high schools take the test to get into the competitive high school? And what we know in many districts is that the mere opportunity to take the test is bound up with social capital and how much your family knows. We had a case recently around advanced coursework where we found a district, one of the reasons that there were very few Latino students enrolled in the advanced coursework in the district is the communications that went home were only in English. And so if you were a Spanish-speaking parent, it was very unlikely that you would know that that opportunity was there for your child. So this question of how do we ensure that middle school students or elementary students who would have the opportunity to get into competitive programs have the opportunity to do so. And what do those students know about your schools? One of the things that some of the most competitive universities have learned is that when you talk to high school students who are at risk or from low-income families or first generation, their vision of what it looks like to be at an elite university is not themselves, right? So to what extent are your students who are from low-income families, African-American, Latino students, students who are first generation, to what extent are they visible to younger students in the community so that they have a vision for what is possible for them when they get to high school? And to what extent are the students that you serve at the high school level providing tutoring and mentorship to middle school and elementary school students who might not otherwise have those opportunities? What we know about opportunity programs at the higher ed level all across the country is that for many students, having that mentor, having that relationship with someone whose experience is similar may be the thing that not only gets them to advance, but gets them to stick with it when it's difficult. Right? Build some of those, what some people call non-cognitive skills, although they require cognition, so I'm not sure that name is exactly right, but those skills of perseverance and the ability to reach out and ask for help when struggling, those kind of skills can be developed by high school students working with middle and elementary school students to provide tutoring and to provide support and mentoring relationships. So to what extent are we creating those possibilities for our kids? But there is a broader advocacy agenda, and I can't be with any audience and not talk about the crossroads that we're at as a country as we have discussions in Washington about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. We're at a moment where we've made a lot of progress as a country. Graduation rate, 81%, highest it's ever been from high school. Achievement gaps around graduation have been closing somewhat. We have made significant progress in terms of access to college for African American and Latino students. So we are at a moment where we have to decide as a country, are we moving forward or are we going back? And unfortunately, that's how the debate is playing out, and we need voices like yours to challenge folks around how we best move forward. We think part of how we move forward is we need good information every year about how students are doing so that parents and teachers have the information they need to act. When we look at school performance, we need to look at that information and focus on growth, how much progress have students made. But it would be a shame if we have a conversation about the direction of education as a country, and as far as we get is talking about assessment and accountability. They matter. We need them. We need to focus states on the lowest performing schools. There are some in Congress who think, well, we'll just leave it up to the states and they'll figure it out and everything will be fine. I was a high school social studies teacher. My read of American history is that just leave it up to the states and everything will be fine has not worked out very well over the course of American history. So we do need an important federal role to protect civil rights and to set a minimum standard, but we should aspire to more. We know that you would have more low-income, high-achieving students in your schools and in America if we made more of an investment in early childhood education. So in our view, how we get to a good new Elementary and Secondary Education Act is a law that incorporates early childhood education, early learning. It's a law that provides resources to our highest needs schools. Unfortunately, there are proposals in Congress that would allow something called portability, where the money would, the nice way to present it is the money follows the kid, but the problem is what that would do is actually transfer dollars from our highest needs districts to our most affluent districts. We think that's the wrong direction. What we should be doing is investing more resources in things like Title I and services for English language learners so that we can get to better outcomes. And a new ESEA should support teacher and principal preparation and development. We know that what's going to make for a more a society characterized by greater opportunity is more effective teaching and school leadership. How we get there is to invest. We also think a new law should focus on innovation and evidence. We should foster local attempts to come up with better systems to help kids. And then when things work, we should invest in scaling those things. Instead, some of our folks in Congress would like to set up the Elementary and Secondary Education Act as essentially a block grant, a blank check sent to states with no accountability, no commitment to innovation, no commitment to teacher and leader development, no commitment to early learning. So that's why I say we're at a moment where we're either going forward or going back, and your voices will matter. Folks need to hear from educators around the country what's important so that we don't miss this opportunity to move forward in a positive direction as a country. I'm looking forward to our discussion. I guess I would close with this, which is one of our challenges, I think, in schools, and certainly I felt this when I was a middle school principal, is there is, and I feel this actually in my job now, there's an endless number of things to do. Right? There's an endless list of things that would be good to do, that we would like to do, and that we haven't quite gotten to. But as communities, we have to be vigilant about the student population that we're talking about here today. If we want to honor the principles on which our country was founded, if we believe in a society characterized by equality of opportunity, if we believe in a society where every kid has a shot, no matter what language is spoken at home, no matter how much their parents made, no matter what job their parents did, we have to pay laser-like attention to the performance of the students we're talking about here today, low-income students who, if given the right opportunities and given the right shot, can excel. So it's an honor to be with all of you. I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
For you all to ask questions, so please, as the microphone will get passed around, I'm sure John can answer a range of questions, but also what else is the federal government doing, and what can you guys do?
I also know if there's a hard question, I can give it to Harold.
Question in the back.
Any more details regarding President Obama's, community college funding proposal?
Yep. So the idea there, thanks for asking about that. The President's budget, which was announced earlier this week, I think makes some very important statements about who we are as a country. One of them is the idea of the America's College Promise, which would ensure that we move towards universal access to at least community college for all students. The idea is to provide funding to students to go to community college in a similar way to actually an initiative in Tennessee, which is intended to say if you're getting good grades and you're working hard, you get to go to community college and we'll make sure you can pay for it. And what's unique about the President's proposal and different from Tennessee is that Tennessee is a last dollar program, whereas the proposal that the President is making is really a first dollar program. And so we know that for some of our students, even when community college costs are relatively low and covered with Pell, they don't necessarily have the money for books and to take care of themselves and all the other things that are required. The idea with this funding would be that it would be first dollar and you could still use your Pell and other funds and other student aid to pay for other expenses. So the vision is that this is an investment in trying to move America towards a time when it's not just a K-12 system, but really a K-14 system. I should also say the President's proposal includes investments that would move us towards universal pre-K. So the hope really is to build a P through 14 system. Some folks have said, well, we should just make the first 2 years of college universal for everyone, whether it's a 2-year or a 4-year. The challenge there is cost, but I think we are moving in that direction as a country. We know that such a large share of our jobs, at least 2 out of 3 in the next decade, will require post-secondary education, and this is a down payment in that direction.
Do I need to stand up? Yeah, okay. Speaking of the Obamas, Michelle Obama has the initiative of Reaching Higher, and one of the things that you mentioned was college counseling experience in the school, and our counselors are, some states are more than one counselor to 1,000 students. In our state, it's like 500 to 1. And so the big issue that we face is we want to reach every student and have that one-on-one, have that college counseling experience, and make sure that every senior, every student moves from high school to post-secondary education. But the issues always comes to money and counselors and having that issue resolved. If we could get that resolved just a little bit, that would help tremendously. Any ideas or thoughts on that idea?
Agree completely, and two things about that. So the First Lady just did an event with the Counselor of the Year, a White House event with the Counselor of the Year, and part of why she did that was to signal, just as there's a White House event for Teacher of the Year, that she wanted to have a White House event for Counselor of the Year, to signal the importance of school counselors for exactly the reasons that you're describing. The President's budget proposes another $1 billion for Title I, in part because of what you're describing. Right? In our highest needs schools, there is a resource gap, and we should do something about it as a country. That proposal from the President is in contrast to some of the proposals around ESEA reauthorization that would allow less funds to go to our highest needs schools. But there's something else I want to mention related to the role of college counselors, which I'm sure many of you are thinking about. There's the counseling during the time in school, but I think increasingly we know students need continuity in that counseling, particularly over the summer after college graduation. In my prior role in New York, one of the things we were looking at is the problem of summer melt and the number of kids who would say they were going to college in June, but something would go wrong and they would not end up there in September. Oftentimes, what would seemingly be small things, like, do you understand what you're supposed to do if you're on your parents' health insurance, but the school asks you if you need their health insurance, do you know what to do about that? And do you read that as, oh, I'm going to have to pay this extra amount per month? Or do you understand that that's something you can waive, right? You need someone to talk to about that, particularly if you're a first-generation college student. And so I think you're exactly right to worry about the ratio of students to counselors. We also need to ask, are counselors sticking with kids at least through that first summer in the transition to college? And so one of the things I hope some high schools will invest in is funding for even a little bit of time of those counselors over the summer to support particularly first-generation college-going students.
Great. I have a quick question. I want to piggyback on a comment that Harold made in the opening, the issue of the gap that exists with high-achieving students, low-income or moderate, being admitted to selective college universities. My experience is the following. We're able to do incredible outreach with college universities, but then the students intellectually are mature, but emotionally are insecure. You have two parts. You have the parents who are fearful of sending their children away, even though that for them, being first generation, being low income, that would be the best thing that could possibly happen. Number two is, then we send the students away to be acclimated into an environment that culturally and socioeconomically is distant of their own experience. So how do we work on being able to narrow that gap? Because it's not only an issue of preparing them intellectually, but then making sure that the support network and the skill sets and conditions are at that college university to assure that that student remains there.
You're exactly right, and a couple thoughts on that. One is accountability for the higher ed institutions around getting students to and through, right? So one of the challenges, I think, I can remember being in a freshman class where they came to do a picture that was going to go on the admissions brochure. And I was sitting at the back. It was one of those long tables that we had in a seminar room. And I was sitting pretty far from the professor. And the photographer came in and sort of panned the room and moved me to the seat right next to the professor. And I understood that was because there was a particular picture that we were looking for on the cover of the brochure. And so it was better for me to be next to the professor than not in the photo. Too many institutions think about their commitment here as an admissions commitment as opposed to a support commitment. And so one of the things that we're thinking about and we've tried to fund through the First in the World competition, which is designed to fund innovation in higher education to get better outcomes, particularly for high-need students, is for schools to think about, well, what are the supports necessary to get students to graduation? We know, for example, and there's a lot of evidence around the country around this, that just having access to a regular sort of counselor, coach, support person who says, hey, you struggled on that exam, here's what you might do to study. Hey, you're stressed out about this paper, here, you should really go to the writing center and get that support. Just that small increment of additional support can be the difference between students finishing or not, students persisting from freshman year to sophomore year or not. So there's the institutional accountability on the part of higher ed and fostering a sense of responsibility in the higher ed institutions. On our side, on sort of the K-12 side, I think there's a question of, can we match students? You know, I admire a lot the work of the Posse Foundation. Can we match students with other similarly situated students so that their experience is not one of isolation, but one where they're going on to a campus together? Can we create, back to what I mentioned earlier about summer, you know, students who've had those summer experiences where they get on a college campus, it helps their parents too, because they've been away, they've had the experience of having them away. Students who get to take early college, high school classes where they're taking that college course as a senior, they're exposed to that level of rigor, that level of independence, that can be very valuable. So I think we have to be thinking about what are the kind of experiences we can give them that are more than just academic, but sort of prepare them for the life of college. But again, I think we at the department have a responsibility to make sure we're pointing higher ed institutions towards their role as well.
Hello. Hi, I had two comments/suggestions. Harold Levy's brought together a lot of people in this room who are at institutions who have figured out how to support students in a way that's very effective. Mm-hmm. And many of our students are low-income students, and they are being supported nicely. Mm-hmm. You mentioned another $1 billion potentially towards Title I schools going to high-needs institutions. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if, as we think about what institutions get dollars to help, if some of that money could be moved towards helping us get more low-income students into our schools. One of the things that, as a good school, we have a hard job making sure our low-income students mm-hmm. get in. But if we were allowed to say 60% of my incoming class, 70% of my incoming class, or the percentage that is in our district is going to be represented in our school, we would do that. Mm-hmm. We know that we can educate those students effectively, and I'd love the opportunity to be able to do that. So to keep that in mind as we set up rules and regulations about what we're allowed to do in our admissions process.
Yeah. Excellent point, and one thing we're hoping will be true of a reauthorized ESEA is admissions policies, zoning policies that support socioeconomic diversity. You know, we've spent a lot of time as a country talking about, well, what do you do in schools where there's concentrated poverty? We almost take as a given that we will have schools that are socioeconomically isolated. But there are strategies, including admissions policies, that would promote socioeconomic integration, and we ought to foster that as well.
I would love that.
Yeah.
The other point I wanted to make was you mentioned funding for the community colleges. And I wanted to say there are a lot of people in the room who are in early colleges. where we also offer degrees to students, so AA programs that are being run through public high schools. And if some of the funding, if we switched it to say AA degrees instead of community colleges, then people who are in this room who are helping those low-income students get through would also benefit from that and be able to pass that benefit along to our students.
That is a very fair point, and something we were working on in New York was, New York has a very robust student aid program, the TAP program, and every year I would try to persuade the legislature that TAP funds should be able to be used for early college high schools, because we know that if students have those experiences, they are more likely to be successful when they get to college. The Jobs for the Future Texas study is very compelling on the impact of early college experiences on graduating from high school, enrolling in college, persisting in college, graduating from college. But it's always a hard sell because people view education as just another expense. And our message, you know, I've heard Arnie say this in many places, is we shouldn't view it as an expense, we should view it as an investment. Right?
And the early colleges where you get your AA degree cut expenses because it's 2 years less of education that's subsidized.
That's right. That's right. No, you're exactly right. So I agree.
Thank you.
Hi, Mirisa Sanchez Medina, Principal, Manhattan Bridges High School, New York City.
We've met before.
We met the other
good to
day,
see
yes.
you. Yeah.
The question that I have, or the issue that I want to bring forth, is the issue of policy and funding with Title I and Title III. Too often, the parameters that come with the funding do not connect with the reality of the schools. So if we want to, and speaking from a school, 70% ELL and the other 30% former Ls, our students need a lot more support than just offering one SAT prep class or additional reading and writing. I feel that the policymakers should listen more to the practitioners. We've been doing this for a while. We understand what it needs, what do we need to do to make it happen. So rather than sending over, this is the grant and this is what you need to do, I want the policymakers to listen to the people who are really actually doing the work.
I think that's right. And one of the things that is true of the president's budget proposal from this week is an increase in funding targeted to English language learners. I think your point on flexibility is also critical. We've tried with the waiver process, the waivers we've given from No Child Left Behind, to try and create more flexibility for states and districts. You know, we'll see how Congress proceeds. My worry is that they will end up with block grants, which on their face will seem very flexible, but will really be a Trojan horse for cuts in funding for education. But your point on flexibility and the ability to use funds in the way that best meets the needs of the students that we have. I also think just on the particular issue of English language learners, I would add that one of the things we think a reauthorized ESEA should do is allow us to make better distinctions between English language learners, between those students who are who have had interrupted formal education, those students who may have been English language learners but have transitioned out. We ought to give districts and schools credit for the progress that those students have made. So we have a number of incentive problems in how we treat English language learners in particular under the current law that we would like to see changed. Again, that'll be one of the topics that we hope we can get some bipartisan agreement on. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Stacey Mancuso. I'm from Design and Architecture Senior High School in Miami, Florida. I've been there for 16 years, so I've had a chance to see some trends. And I'll speak for myself, but I think I speak for a number of people in this room. I have found that there has been a trend that our middle schools who feed us are being chipped away by standardized testing. To the point where we did a color-coded calendar in our high school, 180 days, and there were 31 days where somebody wasn't testing somebody, which is huge. The frustration is even worse in the middle school because they do a lot of practicing for this, which chips away at the specialized talent courses. For me, it's the arts, but for probably most people in this room, it's something that the kids are no longer getting. They don't have that course, they don't know how to develop that skill or that talent, and they don't know how to prepare to come to us. So I was hoping that you standing there could help us with this.
So we're going to try. I'll tell you the things that we're trying to do. So one is there's a bill in Congress, the Bonamici Baldwin bill, that would allow states to use federal resources to audit all the assessments that they're giving and evaluate whether there are assessments that should be removed. And that's both state-level assessments but also local assessments. We know there are lots of places where we have redundant assessments. There's a district in New York that was giving 3 different reading assessments quarterly that essentially measure the same thing. And you know, we all have this experience in schools, right? There's sort of there's a narrative to each thing. You know, we started using that one when there was this superintendent, and she loved that assessment. And then one of the principals really liked this other assessment and convinced the other principals to do it, and so then we started using that second one. And then when the standards changed, we got this third one, and so now we have 3 assessments. We have all this time going to those assessments, and they all assess basically the same thing. So the idea behind this, the Bonamici-Baldwin bill, is that it would be resources for states and districts to reduce assessments in smart ways when they are redundant or unnecessary or just not adding a ton of value. Secretary Duncan also, in describing the administration's principles around ESEA reauthorization, proposed that the new law challenge states to set a cap on the amount of time that can be spent on standardized testing. In New York, the governor and legislature set a cap at 2% of the instructional time of the year that can be spent on standardized testing. New York also has a cap on time that can be spent on standardized test prep as well. You know, there's debate about whether there are folks who say, well, that's another mandate. And so there's a fair argument there. But I think at the end of the day, as a country, we need to have a conversation about what is a reasonable and healthy amount of time on testing. And you know, an annual test that gives sort of like your annual checkup that gives you regular information about how you're progressing is one thing. Turning a school into a test prep factory where what we do instead of instruction is we photocopy last year's tests and we practice all the time, that's not going to get to better outcomes. Yeah.
Tell you too, students are getting wise to it, and they say things like, "Does this one count? You know, do I need to care about this one? Because there are so many that they're starting to get confused."
No, look, I'm very sympathetic to that, and I think we are trying in our conversations with Congress to raise this as an issue and to try to point to some proactive steps that we can take without, you know, the unfortunate thing is what it's causing some folks to do is to suggest that we should abandon having accountability. And so there's a balance to be struck. You know, at the end of the day, ESEA was a civil rights law, and we need to know how students are progressing, and we need to disaggregate the data by subgroups, and we need that information. So we're trying to work with Congress to strike a good balance here. But part of what we also need to do is to get past, I think, a pedagogical mistake that is made. You know, there's a saying, you're not going to make the pig fatter by weighing it more often, right? That replacing good instruction with test prep is not the answer to better student outcomes. Everybody in this room I know understands that, but unfortunately, we have places where they say, well, my kids didn't do well on English language arts this year, so I guess we're going to stop doing history and science. We'll just do English language arts all day. Even though what we know is, if you don't have knowledge about the world and you don't have the vocabulary, you're not going to get better at reading. History and science actually are critical to your success as a reader. So it's actually counter to the goal to devote all of the instruction to test prep. So there's work to do that is cultural, but I also think there are some concrete things we could do in a new law that would help improve the situation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we're out of time for questions, but thank you again, John, for coming out here and providing us with a framework for the rest of the discussions we're going to have, as well as some insights into the federal role in all of this.
Thank you all for what you do every day.